The opening of the scene is set in the dry, late-morning heat of the Serengeti, an environment that is both visually vast and dangerously exposed, where the grass lies brittle and pale under a sun that pulls the moisture from everything it touches, and into this harsh stillness comes a sound that immediately disrupts the ordinary rhythm of the day. A faint, guttural moan, not the expected full-bodied roar of dominance or the sharp bark of warning, but something weaker, trembling, and unusual. Which is exactly why Daniel, a seasoned ranger who has learned to read the language of the land and its creatures, stops mid-step. In these plains, sound is often the first signal of trouble, and the kind of trouble depends on the tone, and here the tone is neither aggression nor alarm, but something softer, heavier, suggesting distress. The fact that Daniel notices this distinction immediately is important. It tells us that he is not only experienced, but attentive enough to sense a difference between the normal calls of a predator and a rare, personal cry. When his eyes find the source, he sees a lioness half hidden in the grass, her posture marked by a low head and a tail moving with slow, restless precision, her breathing faster than it should be for one standing still, and each breath ending in that same trembling moan. This is where the scene plants its first layered tension, because a healthy, unthreatened lioness would either be lying in the shade with her pride, conserving energy, or moving with purpose on a hunt, but she does neither. Instead, she stays exposed and alone. Daniel notices a thin cut on her shoulder, fresh but shallow, and here the narrative removes injury as the main cause of her distress, which makes her behavior all the more puzzling. Lions rarely isolate themselves without a reason, and the Serengeti's open plains punish isolation. Without a pride, she risks losing food to scavengers, losing safety to rival predators, and if she has cubs, losing them entirely. Daniel, aware of this, lowers himself to one knee, not in submission but as a conscious act to minimize his presence, because the first rule in such encounters is to let the animal decide the safe distance, and from this angle, he catches a finer detail, a small shiver in the muscles along her flank, a physical sign of strain or stress. And her ears twitch first toward the north and then back to him, showing her attention is split between two potential priorities, the unseen and the known. He notes the air itself is still, carrying the dry scent of dust layered with the faint but telling metallic tang of blood, and into his radio he speaks calmly, identifying her as an adult female with a possible injury and abnormal vocalization, keeping his language precise because in the field, clarity can mean the difference between sending help and losing time. The lioness then steps toward a mound of dry scrub before stopping, turning her head with sudden attention toward something invisible to Daniel. And this is the first real suggestion that she is responding to a specific presence. She is not wandering. She is fixed in a pattern. She moans again, her voice dragging low through the heat, not in volume but in weight. And her paws press deliberately into the earth with a rhythm that suggests hesitation, her claws shifting in and out as if preparing for both defense and stillness. Daniel, scanning the horizon, sees nothing but gazelle far in the distance, no other lions and no movement in the grass, which deepens the mystery because a lioness in the open like this, away from her pride, is either guarding something or has been separated. If she is injured and alone, her survival odds shrink sharply with every passing hour. If she has cubs nearby, each minute away from them is dangerous because cubs without protection are vulnerable to predators such as hyenas, leopards, and even male lions from outside the pride. She turns toward the scrub again, leaning forward before pulling back, as though her body wants to close the distance, but her mind, or instinct, knows she must keep space. Daniel shifts slightly, watching how she adjusts, how her tail stiffens with his movement, a subtle signal that she is alert to him but not yet feeling threatened enough to bolt. In a low voice, he says, "Easy, girl," a soft phrase meant to maintain his own measured pace as much as to signal calm, and though she glances at him for only a moment, The connection is enough to mark that she is aware of his presence in a controlled way, neither panicked nor aggressive. She resumes her pacing, each pause ending with her eyes lifting toward that same patch of grass, reinforcing the idea that her focus is on something fixed and tangible. And in the African bush, this kind of repeated directional attention almost always means there is something, or someone, there. The sun bears down without mercy, drying the ground beneath them and holding them both in a still air that seems to suspend time. The moments stretching in silence, broken only by her voice and the whisper of grass against her legs. Daniel understands that if he advances too quickly, she may retreat and take him away from the very thing he suspects she is guarding. But if he walks away, he risks never finding her again, and whatever she is tied to in that scrub might be lost without intervention. This balance, the pull between action and restraint, is the core tension in field rescue work, because animals do not give second chances easily, and trust is measured in the space between steps. In the Serengeti, hesitation can mean death, but so can rushing. Daniel considers the possibilities. She could be injured enough to need treatment but too mobile to approach. She could have cubs hidden who are injured or sick, or she could be lingering over a kill, though her body language lacks the territorial dominance that comes with guarding food. The truth, whatever it is, will not wait indefinitely. If she is alone because her pride has moved on, she will lose the protection of group hunting and the shared watch against danger. If she is staying because something more vulnerable than herself is nearby, the delay in addressing it could mean the difference between survival and loss. Her moan comes again, lower, almost like the vibration before a growl, but without the threat, a sound weighted with urgency that Daniel can feel more than hear. And as she turns once more toward the scrub, the unspoken reality settles between them. Whatever holds her here in this open, exposed place is important enough to keep her standing under a punishing sun, important enough to make her risk being seen, and whatever it is, its fate will be decided in the narrowing window of time before either she moves or he does. In this second chapter, the moment begins with the lioness finally breaking from her fixed position and moving, not in a burst of predatory speed, but in a slow, deliberate glide toward a patch of dry scrub that stands like a brittle island in the otherwise open plain, and Daniel, the ranger, reads this pace instantly as something different from the purposeful stalk of a hunt or the easy lope of a lioness changing position to rest. It is the kind of pace that carries an awareness of something trailing behind, a careful adjustment made for the sake of another's weakness. And this is made all the clearer by the way she interrupts her own steps to glance back over her shoulder, the motion subtle but telling. A quick turn of the head, a sweep of her gaze across the grass they have left behind, and then a pause that seems to stretch just long enough for Daniel to notice the weight in it. Her tail hanging low, the line of her back taut with readiness. In the expanse of the Serengeti, where visibility can stretch for hundreds of meters in every direction, her repeated backward glances point to a certainty in her mind that there is something, or someone, meant to be following her, yet Daniel's trained eyes find no such presence, no movement breaking the shimmer of the horizon, no ripple in the long grass, only the deep, hot silence of midday and the constant hum of the wind. She steps again, the dry stems brushing her shoulders, but then she stops entirely, holding herself so still that the wind moves the grass around her more than she moves herself. And in this stillness, the faint smell of old blood rides the air, just strong enough for Daniel to register it, just faint enough to suggest that whatever caused it has been there for some hours. In that moment, the nature of the encounter shifts for him. She is not merely alone and wandering. She is engaged in a kind of guardianship, a tether to a fixed point in the landscape that she will not abandon. Daniel closes some of the gap between them with careful, measured steps, knowing that every decision now carries a balance of risk. If she is leading to a carcass, that means she has food, and food in the Serengeti is never left uncontested for long, especially by hyenas whose calls can carry over vast distances and draw in a mob too large for a single lioness to defend against. If, however, she is leading to cubs, then the risk is even greater, for cubs left unprotected are as vulnerable to predators as they are to thirst or heat, and in open country such as this, even a few minutes can determine whether they survive. Her actions, her pacing, and her repeated checks behind her all fit the second possibility more closely than the first, because there is none of the territorial stiffness, no warning growls or tail lashes that come with defending a kill. Instead, she shows a kind of restrained urgency. One step forward followed by a backward glance, as though each move toward the scrub is weighed against the need to keep contact with whatever lags behind. She dips her head briefly, nostrils testing the air, before lifting it toward the patch of scrub, and when she moves again, Daniel notes that her hind legs seem to hesitate, the motion so slight it might be missed by someone untrained, but to him it suggests reluctance, a desire not to outpace what might be following. In his mind, the decision begins to tighten. He can close the distance to see for himself what lies ahead, risking pushing her into retreat and losing this fragile thread of observation. Or he can stay back and risk her slipping behind the scrub's cover, where finding her again might become nearly impossible, especially if she decides the interaction is over. Her breathing is more even now, though there is a faint quiver in her muzzle at each exhale, a ripple through her whiskers as they catch the light, and then her eyes meet his briefly, not wide or startled, but steady, fixed with the kind of focus that belongs to an animal whose mind is entirely occupied by a single concern. She glances back again, this time for longer, and as she does, a sound leaves her throat, low and muted, so soft that the wind almost swallows it before it reaches Daniel's ears. It is not the moan from earlier, not quite a call, but something that feels directed toward the empty space behind her. And the absence of any visible reply only sharpens the unanswered question. Daniel, almost without thinking, murmurs, "Come on," his words less a command and more an unconscious echo of her own silent urging, though they are so soft they vanish into the heat. The lioness turns away from him then, walking the last few paces to the scrub with a steady resolve, slipping between its thorned, sun-bleached branches and vanishing briefly into its thin shadow. The grass around the path she has taken sways gently, showing the trail of her passage, and Daniel adjusts his own pace, deciding in that moment that he will not lose her now, not when every sign points to her leading him, however unintentionally, toward the answer, and perhaps toward something that may still be saved, if the risks can be managed in time. Daniel followed at a steady distance, his boots brushing softly against the brittle stems of last season's grass, careful not to quicken the lioness's already labored pace. She moved with the wariness of an animal torn between urgency and restraint, her head lifting and lowering as though each step demanded new strength. The arc she traced through the savanna was wide, almost deliberate, curving away from the denser thickets into open stretches where the sun pooled in sharp gold. The air was dry enough to crack the lips, the kind that clung to the throat. But beneath the scent of dust was something else, faint, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. It was fresh enough to ride the breeze, yet not strong enough to speak of a kill. It told of injury, not feast, and Daniel knew instinctively that whatever lay ahead carried risk. For her, and perhaps for something unseen she was leading him toward. Her sides expanded sharply with each breath, ribs pressing hard against her hide, the skin shifting with the effort of lungs struggling to pull air through pain. Every few paces she stopped and turned her head halfway, amber eyes scanning the space behind as though urging a reluctant shadow forward. There was nothing in sight, yet the motion was consistent and deliberate, like a mother coaxing an unseen cub through invisible undergrowth. The wind teased the grass into whispering waves, masking small movements that might have betrayed the presence of another creature. Daniel's senses sharpened. His training had taught him that in the wild, absence of evidence was rarely absence of life. She resumed her path, but each start was slower, her stride uneven, favoring one side. The line of her spine seemed slightly dipped at the hips, her tail low but twitching at the tip, not in irritation but as if to send small, reassuring signals to whatever followed in her mind's eye. The further they moved, the more the air seemed to carry a stillness that felt intentional, as though the savanna itself was holding its breath. Daniel scanned for any sign of danger, scavenger birds, lurking predators, but found none. This was not the erratic flight of an animal pursued, nor the easy gait of one returning to her pride. It was a path carved by necessity, its rhythm broken by moments of gathering resolve. The metallic scent grew fractionally sharper, stirring unease. A wound could slow her to the point of collapse. If she was guarding something, or someone, injured as well, the risk would multiply. In the open, even a lioness could be made vulnerable. Her breathing deepened, pulling her chest high before collapsing in a rough exhale. The sound was quiet but raw, edged with strain. She paused longer now, ears swiveling toward faint noises Daniel could not yet place, perhaps the wind shifting through scrub or the soft rustle of a body lying low in grass. She did not flee from him, nor did she allow him closer than her chosen gap. But there was a strange, measured trust in the way she did not turn away completely. When his foot disturbed a loose stone, her head snapped toward him, muscles tensing, but after a few still seconds, she resumed her forward motion. It was as though she had decided he was neither threat nor hindrance, merely a presence she could tolerate in this fragile moment. The grass thickened as they curved around a shallow depression in the land. Here, the wind carried less dust and more of that faint iron tang. Daniel's eyes followed the line of her paws, wide, padded, yet pressing the ground with a softness that belied her size. She was conserving every fragment of strength, not from fatigue alone, but from the knowledge that something waited ahead that needed it more than he could yet see. She skirted the edge of the depression, testing the ground before each step, pausing when the earth crumbled lightly beneath her weight. Her caution told him this was not an aimless route. It was deliberate navigation, avoiding something unseen below. When she halted again, it was abrupt. Her head rose high, nostrils flaring, eyes fixed on a point beyond a tangle of dry shrubs. The tail twitched once, sharply, then stilled. The sound of her breathing filled the space between them, steadying as if she were gathering herself for the final approach. Daniel could feel the tension in the air tighten like a drawn cord. This was the moment before something would reveal itself. He caught himself holding his own breath, eyes scanning for the movement that must surely come. She stepped forward, and the wind shifted, bringing the scent stronger now, no longer subtle. It carried with it a truth Daniel had been circling in thought but not yet naming. The blood was hers, but not hers alone. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the low weave of grass and thorn, was the source of her backward glances, the silent companion she had been willing into movement. He tightened his focus, knowing that whatever lay in that cover would decide the next moments entirely. In the wild, survival was often a matter of seconds, and right now, hers were running out. Daniel had been following the lioness for what felt like an unending stretch of the afternoon, the grass parting in slow, uneven waves before her. She moved with a strange mix of urgency and reluctance, her frame tense, muscles taut, as though every step pulled at something deep inside her. When she stopped this time, it wasn't sudden but rather a gradual easing, her heavy sides rising and falling with effort. Her head lowered, nostrils flaring in short, searching breaths, and then she stepped aside just enough for Daniel to see. At first, the patch of flattened grass looked no different from the rest of the sun-browned field, but as his eyes adjusted, the shape emerged, small, fragile, almost hidden in the weave of stems and seed heads. A cub, still and silent, lay tucked into the earth as if the grass itself had been protecting it. The lioness hovered above, her body curved protectively, and a low, guttural moan rolled from her chest, vibrating through the dry air. Daniel crouched slowly, careful to keep his movements measured and respectful. The scent of warm fur mixed with something sharper, the faint metallic tang he had noticed earlier. It wasn't just exhaustion in the cub's stillness. This was the brittle edge between survival and loss. A tremor of breath rippled through its small frame, shallow and uneven, the kind that told him it was alive, but only just. He could see the faint rise of its ribcage beneath the thin skin and tawny fur, the subtle twitch of a paw that never lifted from the ground. The lioness's tail flicked once, low and slow, as if warning him without aggression. Her eyes never left the cub. The late afternoon light fell at an angle now, catching in the lioness's mane of whiskers, deepening the shadows that clung to the cub's side. The surrounding grass whispered under the wind's touch, but it was the silence between those sounds that made the moment heavier. Daniel's mind registered the risks in plain, steady terms. A cub this weak, with breathing this shallow, would not survive long without help. The mother's protection was fierce, but it could not provide what the cub needed in this condition. He had seen it before, how quickly the heat could drain what little strength remained, how swiftly the pulse of life could falter. He eased one step closer, then stopped, gauging her reaction. The lioness did not retreat, but neither did she relax. Her muscles stayed coiled, her gaze unblinking. She made no move to touch the cub now, as though her own nearness could not offer comfort enough. Daniel's eyes tracked the minute movements in the cub's breathing, counting, timing. Each inhale took longer to come than the last. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called, sharp, brief, then silence returned. He reached slowly into the pouch at his side, fingers brushing over the familiar shapes inside. Not yet. He needed to be sure. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, no louder than the wind brushing through the stalks. "It's okay, girl." The words were more for the rhythm they carried than the meaning. The lioness's ears tilted slightly, but she did not shift her stance. Her tail's movement slowed, the tip resting against the earth. A small fly landed on the cub's ear, and it twitched weakly, a motion so faint that without watching closely, it might have gone unnoticed. That flicker of life was enough to pull him lower, one knee pressing into the warm soil. He felt the heat radiating from the ground, the dry air carrying no hint of coming rain. Every second here mattered. If the cub could not move on its own, predators and scavengers would not be far once darkness fell. The lioness knew it. Her body spoke that knowledge in the way she stayed anchored over her young, neither retreating nor attacking, just standing between danger and the fragile thing at her feet. Daniel leaned slightly, watching for signs of pain or injury. The cub's breaths came in short bursts now, its chest fluttering rather than rising. The mother's low sound returned, deeper this time, resonating in her throat. She glanced down at the cub, then back at him, and in that brief flicker of connection, the decision settled. This was the moment to act. The lioness shifted just half a step to the side, not enough to invite him in fully, but enough to grant space. It was a gesture without intent to yield, more a reluctant acknowledgement of need. The cub's flank trembled under a new gust of wind, its fur lifting slightly before settling again. Daniel's hand hovered in the air. The final gap between observation and touch unclosed. The light was fading now, bending warmer across the land. Insects skimmed low over the grass, and the air cooled enough for the scent of dust to thicken. The lioness's breathing matched the cub's for a moment, two rhythms struggling against the same quiet threat. Daniel let the stillness hold for one last second before moving. This was no longer a question of waiting. If he hesitated much longer, the unseen struggle before him would come to an end, and not the kind that left the grass whispering with life. Daniel's voice was low and steady as he pressed the radio to his mouth, the faint crackle of static carrying his call for backup into the open air. He gave only the essentials: location, condition, and the urgency of a life measured in shallow, faltering breaths. Every word felt like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the delicate balance in front of him. The lioness did not move. Her muscles were tense under her golden coat, the lines of her body sharp against the grass, but she did not retreat, her amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was not rage nor full acceptance, something in between, a watchfulness born of both fear and reluctant trust. Wind moved through the grass around them, bending the stalks in slow waves, and still neither of them broke their position. The cub lay between them like a fragile thread holding this moment together. Its breaths were slow and uneven, its ribs lifting just enough to show it was still in the fight. Daniel's gaze lingered there for only seconds at a time, always returning to the lioness, reading her stance as carefully as a doctor reads a patient's pulse. Her tail flicked once, then stilled. Her ears turned toward the distant sound of an engine responding to his call, then back to him. Every choice she made seemed deliberate, measured, not the sudden flight of a frightened animal, but the poised control of one weighing every possibility. The sun was lowering, and with it came the long shadows that reached across the grass. Each shift in the light seemed to change the lioness's expression, not in human terms, but in the way the shadows deepened the set of her brow and the hollow beneath her eyes. The soft moan she had given earlier was gone now, replaced by silence broken only by the wind. Daniel eased one step closer, his boots pressing softly into the soil, and she rose to her full height. The movement was slow but firm, a reminder of the strength she could wield if he crossed a line she could not accept. He stopped, letting the air between them settle again. "It's okay, girl," he murmured, though he knew she did not understand the words. Still, the tone seemed to hang in the air like a bridge made of sound. In the distance, the faint hum of the backup vehicle grew louder. The lioness's head turned toward it, her ears high and alert. Her body shifted, positioning her so that she could see both Daniel and the approaching shape on the horizon. The choice lay before her, to stay, to run, or to fight. Yet she held her ground, the muscles in her shoulders rippling beneath her coat, her breath visible in the cooling air. Daniel crouched slowly, lowering his own profile, trying to show her that he would not challenge her claim. His eyes stayed level with hers for a moment before moving again to the cub, whose sides still rose and fell in fragile rhythm. Every second stretched long, bound by the weight of what could happen if her patience faltered. The risk was constant and absolute. One wrong move could see her carry the cub away, or worse, end its chance entirely. But there was also the possibility, slim yet growing, that she might allow this strange coexistence for just long enough. The hum of the engine drew closer still, a sound both promising and dangerous. Her head turned once more, then back to him. It was in that stillness, her eyes unblinking, her stance unwavering, that Daniel understood the fragile space they occupied. Between fear and trust, between the wild's instinct and the intrusion of human hands, they stood suspended, each moment another heartbeat toward the cub's fate. The wind swept low through the grass, carrying the dry scent of earth and the faint coolness of the evening. Somewhere far off, another lion's call rose and faded. The backup vehicle slowed in the distance, and Daniel could see the silhouettes of his team inside. But for now, nothing broke the silence between him and the lioness. She stayed, rooted in her decision, and the cub's faint breathing continued under the watch of two beings who had no words for one another, only this fragile, necessary truce. The sound of the approaching vehicle was little more than a low hum against the restless wind, yet even that made the lioness shift her stance, her head turning sharply toward the movement in the distance. Dust swirled faintly at the horizon, and Daniel, still crouched a short distance away, knew this was the team. Every moment until they reached the scene had felt stretched thin, and now that they were here, time seemed to move differently again, slower, heavier, edged with the knowledge that every step mattered. The rescue vehicle halted far enough not to crowd her, the doors opening without a slam, the shapes of the vet and two assistants moving with deliberate care. They carried only what was necessary. No clatter of tools, no unnecessary noise, just a quiet presence entering the fragile space between fear and survival. The lioness did not run. Instead, she paced a slow, tense arc, her tail twitching in short, tight flicks. Her gaze locked on the cub's still form. Her breathing was faster now, her ribs showing the strain of each inhale, the heat rippling off her in faint waves. She was not only guarding, she was deciding. The vet, a tall figure with years of fieldwork etched into the lines around his eyes, lowered himself gradually to one knee, keeping his body low to the ground, his movements measured as if each second had been rehearsed. He did not look at the lioness directly. Instead, his eyes tracked the cub, scanning for signs of life, gauging the distance between himself and the predator's reach. The team knew what was at stake. One wrong angle, one sudden shift, and the lioness could see them not as help, but as a threat. Still, the cub lay there, small against the earth, the faint rise and fall of its chest just visible when the grass swayed enough to reveal it. The lioness's pacing slowed, her ears flicking back and forth as if weighing the noise of the wind against the sound of strangers on her ground. Daniel murmured a quiet line, barely more than a breath. "It's okay, girl." And though the words held no meaning for her, the tone seemed to soften the air between them. Step by step, the vet closed the distance, the lioness's amber eyes tracking him with a predator's precision. Her muscles stayed taut, the curve of her shoulder blades rising under her coat each time she shifted her weight. The team halted just short of the cub, allowing the lioness a moment to register that no chase was coming, no aggression rising. She stood now, no longer pacing, but the stillness carried tension like coiled wire. The vet extended his hand, not toward her, but toward the cub, pausing until she blinked, slow, deliberate, before reaching again. In that thin strip of silence, broken only by wind and the faint rustle of dry grass, the decision seemed to come. She stepped back, not far, but enough, and her tail lowered slightly, a guarded concession. The cub was lifted with the utmost care, the vet's hand steady despite the heat, despite the proximity of teeth that could end the moment in an instant. As the cub's small body left the ground, a faint whimper broke the air, a sound of pain and confusion, not loud, but enough to draw the lioness forward half a step before stopping again. The vet's eyes narrowed slightly as he saw the source, a deep gash along the cub's hind leg, torn skin matted with blood and dirt, the wound fresh, but clearly from a predator's strike. The edges bore the marks of claws, the spacing too narrow for her own, likely a hyena's attempt before she had driven it away. Infection had not yet set in, but time was already counting down. Without treatment, the cub's chance of survival would fall with each hour under the sun. One assistant readied the gauze and antiseptic, but nothing happened quickly. Each movement was deliberate, with long pauses when the lioness's ears tilted forward or when her tail gave a sharper flick. The vet crouched low, shielding the cub from her direct line of sight as much as possible, his voice low and steady in a rhythm almost like breathing. The lioness circled once, her paws leaving faint depressions in the soil, her head lowering just enough to scent the air, catching the mix of her cub's blood and the strange smell of humans. She did not rush in. Instead, she stopped, the tip of her tail twitching once before going still, the heat shimmering around her. Her eyes no longer darted between faces. Now they stayed on the cub, unblinking. The vet pressed the gauze gently to the wound, the cub's leg trembling weakly in response. There was no fight left in the small body, only the reflexive flinch of nerves. "You're almost there," he murmured under his breath. The words meant as much for himself as for the creature in his hands. The dressing was secured, the bleeding slowed, and with that, the hardest part of the first intervention was done. But the risk was far from over. They would have to decide, treat further here, exposed to heat and possible threat, or attempt to transfer to the mobile care unit, gambling that the Lioness would tolerate it. Every calculation hung on her next move. For a long moment, no one moved. The team froze in place, the cub cradled in careful hands, the Lioness watching with the stillness of something that could change in an instant. Then, a breeze passed through, carrying with it the faint sound of the distant plains, the low hum of insects, the rustle of unseen animals moving in the grass beyond sight. It was a fragile moment of balance. The cub breathed, the Lioness held her ground, and the humans waited in the thin, tense space between fear and trust. The light was beginning to fade, the edges of the grassland sinking into a softer shade. But in the small circle of quiet where the team worked, time felt suspended. The cub lay on a folded canvas, its tiny chest moving in uneven, fragile rises, each breath shallow and uncertain. A faint tremor passed through its body with every exhale. The vet's hands were steady, working with a precision that came from years of practice. But there was no masking the gravity in his eyes. Daniel stood a step back, watching, his posture still and deliberate, knowing that even the smallest shift of movement could unsettle the Lioness. She was closer now than before, her massive frame low to the ground, muscles taut but not in aggression, rather in a kind of unyielding, instinctive protection. The space between her and the cub had narrowed until her forepaw brushed the edge of the canvas, her breath slow but heavy. The air carried the faint scent of dust and dried grass, and somewhere far off, a nightjar called. But here, in this pocket of earth, the only sound was the cub's fragile breathing. The team worked without words, exchanging small nods and glances, gauging every moment by the mother's reactions. When the vet gently adjusted the cub's head to clear its airway, the Lioness leaned in, her whiskers almost grazing the man's hand. Her eyes did not leave the cub for even a second. There was no growl, no snap, only the silent, watchful weight of her presence. Daniel felt the tension ripple through his own chest, the unspoken understanding that their help was balanced on a knife's edge between trust and rejection. The cub's wound had been cleaned, a shallow tear along its flank where a predator's teeth had grazed bone, but the deeper concern was unseen. "Internal damage," the vet had said in a low voice, not meant to be overheard by the mother who crouched only a meter away. With each passing minute, the cub's movements became less certain, its head rolling gently to one side, eyelids heavy. The vet's hands slowed, then stopped, resting lightly on the cub as if to feel every breath. Daniel knew the signs. He had seen them before in other rescues, the way the body began to surrender, not suddenly, but with a gradual quietness, as though nature itself had decided the moment. The Lioness lowered herself fully now, her great head resting on the ground beside the cub's frail body. The size difference was staggering, yet there was no weight in her touch, only the careful stillness of a creature whose strength could crush but whose instinct in this moment was pure gentleness. Her eyes were half closed, and a deep, almost inaudible rumble passed through her chest, not in warning, but in a sound so low and resonant it seemed to vibrate through the earth. Daniel glanced at the vet, and in that shared look, there was no need for words. The outcome had arrived, silent and unannounced, in the slow stilling of the cub's breaths. The air seemed to grow heavier, the kind of stillness that makes every distant sound more pronounced, the rustle of grass, the soft ticking of cooling metal from the vehicle, and the steady hum of insects rising with the evening. The Lioness stayed where she was, unmoving, her head remaining against her cub, eyes fixed not on the humans now but on some point beyond them. Daniel's hands rested on his knees, his voice almost a whisper. "It's okay, girl." The words weren't meant as comfort, not really. They were more an acknowledgement, a recognition of what had just passed between life and stillness. No one stepped forward. No one reached for the cub. The space belonged to the mother now, and they all knew it. The vet slowly backed away, his movements quiet and deliberate. Daniel followed, not turning his back until there was a respectful distance between them and the lioness. She didn't look at them as they withdrew. Her gaze was somewhere deep in the fading light, her breath slower now, as though she too had accepted the choice that had been made without her consent. Far across the plain, the wind began to move through the taller grasses, bending them in soft, rippling waves. The colors shifted with the dusk, gold into bronze, bronze into muted gray. The team stopped near the vehicle, watching from a distance, their figures still against the vastness of the land. The lioness remained by her cub, the outline of her body framed against the dimming horizon, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of her own breath. When darkness began to settle, the first stars pricking faintly overhead, she lifted her head, just slightly, as if sensing the change in the air. Then she lowered it again, her body curling protectively around the small, still shape beside her. In the quiet that followed, the land felt vast and ancient, as though it had witnessed countless such moments before, when human hands could only go so far, and the rest was left to the quiet, unbending laws of the wild. The light was fading into the amber hush of evening when the lioness lifted her head. For hours she had stayed beside the small, still body, her flank rising and falling in slow, weary breaths, her tail twitching once every few minutes as if some instinct still searched for signs of movement that would not come. The air hung heavy with the scent of dry grass and dust, the ground cooling beneath the first breath of night. Daniel remained where he was, a few meters away, his hands still, his voice absent. There was nothing left to say, no motion that would change the truth now fixed between the animal and her fallen young. The risk they had fought against all day had become reality, the fragile thread of life unraveling quietly in the fading heat. The lioness did not look at the humans. Her eyes lingered on the cub, tracing every inch of the small frame as though memorizing it before time could carry it away. She leaned forward, pressing her nose gently into the cub's neck, breathing in the scent that had once meant warmth, hunger, and life. A low, muffled sound escaped her. Not a roar, not even the deep grunt of contact calls, but something smaller, buried deep in her chest. It was a sound Daniel knew he would remember longer than the sight itself. The wind shifted, rattling the brittle grass stems, and for a moment the only movement was her paw, resting lightly against the cub's side, claws sheathed, the touch more like holding than claiming. Minutes passed, though time felt suspended. In the distance, the rest of the pride had begun to move, their silhouettes melting into the long grass toward the watering hole. She stayed behind. Predators rarely linger over the dead. The rhythm of survival pushes them forward, yet she remained as the horizon deepened into gold and shadow. The risks ahead for her were immediate. To fall behind the pride meant to lose their protection, to face the next days alone in territory that would not forgive solitude. And yet she waited. Daniel could see the hesitation in every breath she took, the weighing of instinct against the pull of something unspoken but strong. Finally, she shifted her weight. The movement was slow and deliberate, as though each muscle had to be convinced to obey. She touched her nose once more to the cub's head, and then stood, her ribs visible beneath the curve of her back, the fading light catching the dust clinging to her coat. She did not glance back at the humans. She did not linger over the body again. Instead, she stepped forward into the grass, her gait unhurried but steady, the blades parting and closing around her legs until they reached her shoulders. The grass swallowed her shape in moments, but the sound of her steps, a soft rustle, continued for several seconds before fading into the distance. Daniel remained watching long after she had vanished, listening to the silence that followed. The cub lay motionless in the pale dust, the warmth of the day leaving its body just as the sun left the land. He had seen many losses in the wild, each a reminder that nature holds its own authority, unmoved by effort or care. Yet this moment carried something heavier. Perhaps it was the quiet endurance in the lioness's retreat, or the sound she made before walking away, a sound that was neither rage nor surrender, but a simple acknowledgment of what had passed. The wind rose gently, combing through the grass where she had gone, carrying her scent into the darkening plain. Somewhere beyond sight, she would rejoin the others or move alone until morning. Life for her would continue, hunting, defending, surviving. But the weight of this day would follow unseen, just as the memory would remain with those who had watched. The sun's final line of gold broke apart on the horizon, scattering into the stillness. In the quiet that followed, the grass swayed once, then stilled, and the plain lay in waiting for the night.